Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. My name is Arlene Sachs, and today I'd like to welcome Suzanne Levy. Welcome, Suzanne. I'm glad to have you.
Thank you.
Suzanne is the librarian of the Virginia Room in Fairfax County. And I think we'll start by asking, what's the Virginia Room?
Okay, the Virginia Room is the local history and genealogy collection for the Fairfax County Library System. It's located in the Fairfax City Regional Branch on Chainbridge Road, and over the years, it's grown rather considerably as we try to meet the needs of a diverse population in Northern Virginia. So in some ways, Virginia Room is a bit of a misnomer when it comes to our genealogy collection.
So it started out as just Virginia genealogy.
Exactly, exactly.
And now you've got a lot of material that's going to be interested to Jewish genealogy.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, and looking over your first of all, you brought a lot of books, but that's only a fraction of what you have, because I've seen your list, and the list is really very good for most genealogists, especially for a beginning genealogist. It's a marvelous source. How did this Jewish collection come to be?
Well, we started, our basic premise is to buy how-to books for just about every nationality we can find. So we had a few basic how-to books, like Kurt's Wiles, From Generation to Generation.
Yeah, this is sort of the basics for anything.
And that's probably the first one I read. I read the earlier edition of his, and maybe I bonded with him because he's a librarian and we think alike. But it's a really wonderful read, just his story of how he traced his own family. It's not a dry, do this, do this, do this. He uses personal examples for everything.
Yes, I've heard of him. He's a marvelous speaker.
So we've kind of grown from just the general how-to book. We've had a very wonderful volunteer with our collection who happens to be a retired Mobil oil company person. And when Mobil people donate their time to various groups, Mobil makes cash donations in their honor at the end. And so we've received a fairly sizable cash donation to the Fairfax County Library Foundation. And this volunteer asked that we use some of that money to purchase more Jewish genealogical materials.
Well, I think you've done a good job in picking out them, because I've looked over your whole list of what you have. And let's look at a couple of the Discovering Your Jewish Ancestors. This one I was not familiar with, so that's a fairly new book.
That's a newer one, yes, and I kind of brought that because that's the most recent one I found.
I think probably the most detailed one is the Avatino Guide to Jewish Genealogy, and that's a huge book, and I know you have that as well.
We do, and it was too heavy to bring with what else I brought. Yeah.
That's one that had 80 different authors of it, so everybody wrote on their expertise, and this is one that's obviously not from around here, Jewish Genealogy Resources in New York.
And again, we have materials on other states, how to do research, and this helps not just Jewish researchers in New York, but it has basic facts for anybody whose family has lived in New York at any time.
I think that's something all genealogists have to remember, and I think they do it automatically. If they're looking or listening to somebody talk about whatever it is, they apply it to their own situation, which may be slightly different, and because some of the things tend to be more or less the same wherever you are. And I know they have books like that for Boston and so on. Now you say there's a new Fairfax Library under construction. I didn't even realize that.
That's correct. Fairfax City and Fairfax County, through a rather interesting financial arrangement, are working together to build a new Fairfax City Regional Library. It's located on North Street, where Old Lee Highway comes into North Street. So it's on the edge of the Old Town Fairfax City area, and it's maybe a block from where we are now. We can look out our window and see the construction. We hope to be opening about this time next year, if all goes well. And I should say the Virginia Room is increasing its space by about 3 times. So we're going to have...
It seems to me, I was up there and it was pretty crowded.
We're pretty crowded, and we're going to have a large rare book room and a much larger public area.
So you really only have resource materials. I mean, you don't have a lending, the Virginia Room stuff is not lending library type.
That's correct. Now, we're in the process. We had a separate circulating collection, but we are integrating that into the main collection at the Fairfax City branch. And I should say that other libraries in the Fairfax County system do have genealogy how-to books. They may not have how to do Jewish genealogy, but they would have the more general titles.
Now, let's say I wanted this book and I was someplace else in the county. Could I request that and get it sent over?
No, we don't send the reference books to other branches, but you can call the Virginia Room, and this would be true with any library. If we have a book and you just want to check and see if the name you're looking for is in it, we're happy to pull the book off the shelf, look things up for you, and tell you what's there.
But you're not going to do their whole genealogy for you.
No, no.
Let's take a look at a few of these other books that you brought along.
Well, this particular book is the Encyclopedia of Jewish Life before and during the Holocaust. It's a 3-volume set, and I just brought volume 1 along. It's full of history of communities all over Europe where there was Jewish settlement. Gives some background on the communities. There are some photos in it, but it's just, if you've tracked down your person to a particular place, you might want to read a little bit more deeply in this.
And of course, that's the difficulty with so much of us.
Exactly.
This is one I wanted to mention because I had never seen this book before, A Field Guide to Visiting a Jewish Cemetery. And that has tons of phrases in there. And I guess it would be pretty hard if you don't know any Hebrew at all, which I don't, to sit and look through. I don't know if you can focus in on something like that. It shows the Hebrew, plus it shows the English translation of it.
You just happen to open to a list of names, so it gives you the translation and the Hebrew spelling of Edda and Esther and various names. So.
Oh, okay. I just opened it. But it's got all sorts of things in there. I'm going to have to take a look at.
Again, that's a newer one, but I thought that would be very helpful for anybody who's visiting Jewish cemeteries, which can be somewhat daunting.
Well, we went to one, and I was sure I could find Selig, which was the name we were looking for. That wasn't so hard. But when you've got 1,000 tombstones in front of you there is no way we could find it. I mean, we were fortunate that there were tombstones standing there at all. Yeah. But it was well hidden, that's why it still existed.
Okay.
Merriam Weiner's.
Yeah, another one that's quite interesting is Jewish Roots in Poland, and this is Merriam Weiner's wonderful book. She has lists of all the Polish archives. She has information about the major cities in Poland where the archives are with maps, beautifully illustrated, and it's one of those books you could just sit down and spend several hours with. And if your Jewish roots are in Poland, I would strongly recommend taking a look at that.
She does a lot of research there, and she's a professional genealogist and helps a lot of people over there as well. Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of brought examples of various things. We have a genealogical gazetteer of the Kingdom of Hungary, and not a lot of people may have Hungarian roots, but some do, and this is certainly a wonderful starting place, and it can be helpful for the Jewish researcher and the non-Jewish researcher with Hungarian roots. We have similar things for other places in Europe. And I should add, I didn't bring them along, but we have a large number of maps that we purchased with this grant money.
That's so important because so many, I know when we had the librarian from Library of Congress, he said he could sometimes tell under what kingdom the country was by the way the person pronounced the name of the town, because the same town would have different names, whether it was Poland today or Austria or Lithuania or whatever it was, because those borders change so often, and they change the names of the town.
Well, they might have a Polish name, a Ukrainian name, and a Russian name, and maybe even a German name. So
and the people never leave, but they left their little house, but they lived in 4 different countries. Exactly. And that's why it's become so difficult to find anybody in Eastern Europe. Well, even Western Europe, France was part of Germany, then it was part of France. The borders kept changing.
Well, we have that same analogy here in Virginia. George Mason was born in Stafford County, but actually he was born in Fairfax County out on Mason Neck, which at the time of his birth was in Stafford County. So you have to know your local history.
I didn't realize that it changed. Yeah. I know. Let's look a little bit about some of the online resources that are available at the library.
Okay, the Fairfax County Library System and many other libraries around the country offer Ancestry's Library Edition. That is sold to libraries with the proviso that remote access not be allowed. So you do have to come into your library branch to use it. You do not just have to come to the Virginia room. You can go to any branch. And some of our computers are set up with databases on them, so you don't have to go through the sign-in, use the computer for 30 minutes. You can stay on longer on the database computers.
I do note at the small library that I'm closest to, which I think is Sherwood, is that the one on Route 1? Anyway, yeah. When you go in there, you have to say that you want, if you just say you want to use the databases, they'll direct you to one set of computers. If you say you want to use the Ancestry, there's a separate computer.
Okay.
And that's, or actually two computers, but those are set aside, and they'll let other people use them, but if you want and you don't have to sign up. And you
exactly.
I mean, you do have to, if somebody's waiting, you're still limited to 30 minutes.
Exactly.
But we haven't had that problem. We've been there several times looking it up. So sometime, if you do go, make sure you tell your librarian what it is you want to look at.
And we actually have signs on the two public PCs in the Virginia room that say these are for local history and genealogy researchers, and we will bump you off if you're not using those databases. But I should also add, we offer Heritage Quest Online, which you can access remotely with your Fairfax County Library card number. We've also added in recent months the Historic Washington Post and the Historic New York Times online. And if you have ancestors who came through New York, you may be able to search for them in the Times database.
What years, do you know what years?
I believe the New York Times starts 1851 and probably runs to 1990, and the Washington Post is, I believe, 1884 to 1990.
Okay, so
and to be honest, we just added the New York Times in the last couple of months, and I really haven't sat down to use it. But again, remote access to both of those databases. We also have something set up on the Fairfax County Library System's websites called Websites by Subject. And if you go to genealogy as a subject, we will link you to a lot of the major genealogical databases, Jewish Gen, the Mormons website, Cindy's List, all of the basic resources. And our staff, as we discover new things, that's kind of a work in flux, and we will change and add new things. We will take things off, but that's another way we try to make it a little bit easier for the researcher.
So really the only thing you have to come in to the library for would be the resource books or the Ancestry.
Exactly.
And the resource books certainly are worth a trip over there, I think. Let's look at some of these others, like the Yivo Book, which is...
Okay, this is a bibliography. Actually, it's a guide to the Yivo archives, and it's really just kind of a user's guide to what's there. So if you're planning a trip to the Yivo archives, I would suggest come in and take a look at this, be knowledgeable about what's there before you go.
Let me explain what Yivo is. Yivo is an acronym of some Lithuanian words, Yivo is essentially an archive of manuscripts from mostly Eastern Europe and mostly written in Yiddish. And so it's sort of unique in what it has. It was actually begun, I don't know when it was begun, but well before World War I, and they thought what they had here was all that was recovered, was saved. And then after the wall went down, they found lots and lots more of their old materials still existing. And I don't know what they've done. I think they've just microfilmed them. But it's certainly a good resource for anybody doing research in Eastern Europe.
And you know, I was going to add back to the databases on Eastern Europe, a couple of the new things that have shown up on Ancestry that people may not know about are the index to the World War I draft registrations. Many immigrants had to register for the draft, and the draft cards are there. It tells their closest relative. It may give their birthplace, and this can be very helpful, a more specific birthplace than just a country. Another one is what they call the old man's draft for World War II. And any man who was born, I'm sorry, I don't know the dates off the top of my head, something like between 1880 and 1897, had to register for the draft in World War II. I guess this was in case all of the reserves were depleted, you had this listing. And again, many immigrants who weren't in the 1890 census, which was, or who were first in the 1890 census, which was destroyed, may show up in that older man's draft for World War II. So I would recommend, if you're not familiar with those, you take a look at them.
That's interesting. I've never even heard of that.
I hadn't either until it showed up on Ancestry.
It's interesting. There's so much more that keeps coming up, and you can barely keep track of everything that's online these days, because everybody's doing their little thing, and it's. Let's see. Here's some other. This is the London. I wonder why they call it Jewish immigrant associations rather than the general term Landsmannschaft, which we use. But I guess that's too Yiddish.
That could be, and this is a university press kind of book, so I'm not really sure what the reason behind writing this was. But again, it's about Jewish immigrant associations.
I'm holding up a blank book. That's sort of done.
It's about Jewish immigrant associations in New York, and these associations were not just in New York. My husband's from Philadelphia, and there were a number of them there. His family belonged to one. I wish I knew which.
I think it was, all the immigrants tended to group together, and even some of the associations were quite active and helped people and lent money. Others were just burial society, but again, the same group from the same area and so on. I guess they did things more or less the same way, and they were used to it. And this is an interesting one, I thought, indexed to marriages and deaths in the New York Herald. So if that was a newspaper, you know, obviously there were several newspapers, and it's just the title, but it just gives it's an index to all the names, the weddings, bride and the groom, and the date.
And then there are deaths in the back.
And the deaths, so that's a...
And again, this volume 3 of this series cuts off in 1870. And you're just starting to see more Jewish names appear in it. So
well, that's in general,
the kind of thing that we've added.
So now this is volume 3. Are they continuing and going on, or is this always going to only cover these dates?
I'm not really sure, but this is a local author. Maybe he'll call in and let us know.
Well, I think sometimes they start with a few years, because you have to start somewhere, and then as there's more need, they'll progress and do some more. Now, you said you have an interlibrary loan?
Exactly. Most public library systems in the country and university libraries participate in the in the Interlibrary Loan program, and Fairfax County is no exception. If we don't own a book in our collection, and that means in any branch, we can apply to borrow a book from somewhere else. And a good example is the National Genealogical Society moved their collection to the St. Louis County Public Library with the proviso that those books be loaned to anybody in the country. You don't have to be a member of NGS. So we've been able to get a lot of books for people. Some of the university press books that would be histories that would be more esoteric are often on the shelves in university libraries, and we can get them for you.
I know one time I requested something interlibrary loan, and I got back a message, what exactly do you want of that? And so I wrote back, or however it went, back what I wanted, and they Xeroxed it rather than letting that library book go out of their library.
A lot of times that will be the case. Many of these types of books are reference only at libraries, and so if there's a specific thing you want, they will copy it and send it. And we will do that too. If you don't live near the Fairfax City Regional Library and you see a book in our online catalog that you wonder if your family might be mentioned in, just call the Virginia room. We'll go get the book, look it up. We can fax a few pages to you, or we can read it to you over the phone, or maybe we'll get you so excited you'll come visit us.
And maybe, I don't think we've given the web page for Fairfax County.
Okay, our website is www.fairfaxcounty.gov/library.
Simple enough.
And then you can go to library branches and it will direct you. You can select the Virginia room as a specific branch. You can email me directly from that point. We link you to many of the sources I've talked about, including our historic Fairfax County newspaper index, which unfortunately doesn't bring up the full text of the article, but it's a wonderful index to Fairfax and Alexandria newspapers, even the Rest and Time. So for instance, if you were looking for a marriage of somebody in primarily 20th century, but I know we have histories of some of the synagogues and temples in Fairfax County that are mentioned. They may have gone through the planning process, and you may find references to your community on that index.
What are some of these other books that you had?
Okay, well, one, I did not bring Jeffrey Malka's book on Sephardic genealogy, but I did bring something which you may want to show. It's a dictionary of Sephardic surnames, and I was kind of interested in that last night. I happen to have a friend who is a Sephardic Jew from North Africa but grew up in France, and I checked the name in the book, and there it was, and it said the book was from Algeria and Tunisia, and the name was also found in Brazil, I believe it was. So you can look up individual names in this. The book is written in both English and Spanish, I guess, on the actual, or it may be Portuguese. I'm not real sure. That looks more Portuguese than Spanish. It probably tells at the beginning of the book.
But as long as there's the English translation on one side and all of the...
Again, it can be a clue to the researcher if they have no idea what the family name is. Unfortunately, it's English and whatever language on the other page. Other things we've been trying to collect are some history. Genealogy and family history and history go hand in hand, and you need to know a little bit about boundaries. You need to know how people move from one place to another, not just in Europe, but in this country as well. So we've added some things, again, mostly from the Avotenu and the Jewish Gen book lists. And this was one that was recommended. It's on the Jews in Poland and Lithuania in the 18th century. Now that's a little early for most of us. Many of us are lucky if we can get our people into the 19th century. But that would be an example of the kind of thing.
That's a wonderful picture on it.
It is. And one of these days I may sit down and read. Its subtitle is what? A Genealogy of Modernity. Oh. So again, if your people came from that part of the world, you might want to read a little bit more about it and see if you can, if you don't have exact family stories, you may get at least a general idea.
Well, I think that's what so many of us try to do if we don't have the exact. You want to know how the people lived, and because one of the things my great-great-grandfather wrote he wrote it in 1871, and he had to walk to another town. And then in parentheses he put, we didn't know about trains in those days. And it's these little things that would, it was a big thing when a train came. I mean, we think of trains as old-fashioned, but you got to get your mindset to what was available then.
Exactly. And many of us have immigrant ancestors who maybe came through the Lower East Side of New York. And this one is called The Time That Was Then. And it's the Lower East Side, 1900 to 1913, an intimate chronicle. Again, if it's not about your specific family, you'll get a flavor for what they lived like on the Lower East Side. Another one we have here is a history of the Jews in Poland and Russia. And, again, that was one of those territories people were under. The Austrian Empire, they were under the Poles, they were under the Ukrainians.
I've seen in the census records, it'll say Poland one year, one time, Russia another time, sometimes it'll say Poland-Russia.
Exactly.
You figure out where they came from.
Exactly, but again, this is one that has a lot of depth to it, and if you want to know more about what life was like in that part of the world, I would recommend taking a look at this. We have other things on on Galicia and Ukraine and Lithuania and...
Well, I've looked over this list, and being fairly familiar with genealogy, you've got a really good cross-section of everything that you need. You know, most of them, a lot of Alexander Bader's books, the Dictionary of Jewish Surnames, the Polish and Russian and Galicia, all of that. The other thing I guess we didn't mention, because you can access that from home, is the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons indexes are now
exactly, and they're changing their database. So if you haven't looked at it recently, there are some new features in it, and they're in the process, I believe, of putting some of the microfilmed records
I've heard that they're
online.
going to.
That is their goal.
Every time you look at it, it's got more and more. I remember the days when you had to sit with a little microfilm and go from one microfilm to the other and
wait for it to come.
Well, one time, you know, I looked for something under France. It wasn't under France. It was under Germany. But the French, the spelling was French. So, you know, now you do it either way and it'll pop up, and they've, you know, got everything cross-referenced and all.
Exactly. And I should add that Cindy's list, again, you go to the country links for Cindy's list, and it will link you to countries and then subdivisions within a particular country. So if you haven't played with Cindy's list.
Yeah, she's got an awful lot on there. I was almost intimidated when I saw all those links. I wasn't quite sure how to work my way through that. Well, thank you very much. It's been very informative. I'm really glad you made the contact and volunteered to come on and be on the show today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.